Hi, everyone, and welcome to Zero to Empire. I have Mitchell Klinsky, the neuropsychologist and author of Dementia Prevention books, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain, and at brain.com. And here he is. And what actually got you started with all that, and how did you come about all that?
Well, it's not the kind of thing that starts in one day, I can tell you that. Um, I'm a neuropsychologist. Basically, we test how people think. We measure their cognitive abilities, their attention, pain, their short term memory, their problem solving skills, and we also look at their emotional state. So, this is a tool that can be applied to a variety of different brain related problems. So, I see people with concussions, I see people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But most of the people I see are either worried about or experiencing declines in their thinking abilities as they age. So they're becoming worried about dementia. Huge problem. It's a growing problem. It already affects Alzheimer's disease, which is one of the major forms, already affects something like 6.5 to 7 million people in the United States, and it's going to double in the next 20 to 30 years. So it's a really important problem and one where a lot of research and a lot of money is currently being spent trying to find out how to stop this rising tide of memory loss.
That's awesome. And what initially sparked your interest and passion for all of this?
I went to school back before there was much in the way of neuropsychology. So I was originally trained as a clinical psychologist, got my PhD in clinical psychology. And at that point, there wasn't really very much known. There were some courses which I was able to take in graduate school on brain behavior relationships. There were some seminars I attended, but there weren't anything in the way of postdoctoral training. So these days, you get a PhD or a PsyD, which is a professional doctorate degree, and you go on a 2 year postdoctoral training. Well, back then, those things didn't even exist. And so we pretty much sort of bootstrapped our way into this and read a lot, paid attention to the literature, and basically started practicing. I started the first neuropsychology laboratory in Western Massachusetts at Bay State Medical Center back in 1977. Still exists today. I'm not part of it any longer, but it's been a growing field. Sort of like, how you go body surfing. I don't know if you've ever been a body surfing person, but I used to like to go body surfing, and you'd stand out there in the water and you'd wait for the wave to get right to the right point. If you're lucky, you'd jump up at that time, catch the wave at the right time, and it would carry you onto the shore. You get a really good ride. But if you're too early or too late, it didn't work out so well. I happen to be very fortunate in that the field of neuropsychology was developing right when my interest in this area developed.
Yes, that's great. And I've also body surfed in like Hawaii, so I understand that whole idea of it, and it's actually pretty fun. But yeah, you really do got to time it right. And what actually inspired you to transition from working in neuropsychology to building your own practice and eventually multiple ventures like Brain Doc and Clionsky Neurosystems?
So I worked in a hospital setting for 7 years and then went into practice on my own and began to do, I did a lot of psychotherapy back then, but also began to work with people with a variety of brain problems. And I realized that as an individual, I was very limited in how many people I could see and how many services I could deliver. So, neuropsychology is a lot of test administration and interpretation. Well, I do the interpretation piece of it, but I have a lot of people who administer and score the tests for me who work underneath me. And over time, the number of people that I needed kept growing. And I started bringing on colleagues so that we had more ability to deliver services. So at this point in time, we see more people for memory disorders possibly than any place in the country. I currently see anywhere between 600 and 700 patients for dementia on an annual basis. And the only way that's possible is for me to have people work for me. And so it's sort of a pyramid kind of structure where I and at times other colleagues have been at the top of a pyramid. And underneath it, there are people who do interviews of the family, who administer the tests that we then have decided they're going to give them. And then they score those tests, and we interpret the results and use it to inform the doctors and the patients about what's going on and what they can do in the future. So over time, we've developed a couple entities that have come off of this. One of them is Clionsky Neurosystems. That primarily handles our intellectual property. There's two tests that my wife, who's a psychiatrist, and I have developed. One's for dementia and one's for automobile accident concussions. And we also wrote a book called Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain. And that also comes out of the same structure from a corporate perspective. And we've had other corporations. We have one just for ADD testing, and we have one for my general neuropsychology practice. It allows us to have a focal point, a name that means something in the community that allows people to say, oh, that's where I want to refer that person.
Yes, that's very solid that you have all of these different entities. And that's awesome. You're making such a great impact in the world itself with all these different people. And so, how did you actually go about the concept of preventing dementia to ended up going to creating tools like the memory orientation screening test and launching a book?
Well, the memory orientation screening test actually came first. We published that and did research on that at this point about 15, 20 years ago, and then wanted to develop a test basically that doctors could give in their offices that took only 5 minutes. It could give you an accurate idea of what a comprehensive evaluation would generally show us. So, a comprehensive evaluation takes about 3 to 4 hours. Well, that's not feasible for most people. And because of the need for spending that much time, there's huge backlogs when people are referred to neuropsychologists. Neurologists in primary care kept saying to me, look, you do a great job. These reports are very excellent, comprehensive evaluations, but we need something we can use during a visit to let us know who to refer to you, who to start on medication, essentially how to proceed. So that was the impetus for then taking all that data that we'd accumulated and distilling it down into a 5 minute test that surprisingly has a very high correlation with the overall level of someone's functioning. So that then led us to marketing this in cooperation with a couple of different entities. And we're now about to actually relaunch it and develop a version that people can use at home with a companion version in doctors' offices. So we envision a place where someone can say, I'm worried about mom's thinking or my dad's thinking or my spouse's, or maybe even I'm concerned about my own. Here's a test I can take that'll give me some information as to whether that senior moment is really significant or just a momentary thing. And I can then use this to begin a conversation with my doctor, have them repeat a parallel form of the test in their office, and begin an intervention perhaps that's much earlier than it's currently being done. So that was really what came first was the test for this. The idea of dementia prevention grew out of the fact that we were seeing people way later in the process than we should have. People were coming to us with mild to moderate dementia, and we were treating them. We were evaluating them and making interventions that had to do with their health and their lifestyle and medications that actually slowed down the rate of decline, and in some patients allowed them to be better than they had been when they walked in the door, which is pretty much unheard of in the world of dementia. Dementia, Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementias, there's a variety of these, are progressive. They get worse over time. And we were getting really great results by treating them in a very advanced way. And then we thought, well, if this works for people at this level, Wonder how this would work in people in milder stages. So we started seeing people in the precursor stage, what's called mild cognitive impairment. And you know something? The interventions worked even better because people had more brain integrity at that point. Their brains were less damaged. And that caused us to then say, well, let's start earlier. And coincidentally, at that point, the scientific world started really paying attention to dementia prevention. There was a seminal paper that was published back in 2017 when we were really getting into this, published by a group called the Lancet Commission in England. And they started laying out ways in which dementias could be prevented. They've had two subsequent papers on this, one in 2020 and one in 2024. But what we now believe is that up to 50% of all cases of dementia, 50% of Alzheimer's, 50% of vascular dementia, can be prevented if we know what to do and start early enough. So that's become our passion at this point, is figuring out how to get people to pay attention to doing something in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, etc., that will preserve their brain when they're in their 70s and 80s.
Definitely important to take action early so that you don't have dementia or anything of those serious brain effects down the line. So it's important, definitely, that you're educating everyone, and it's awesome. So, would you say is one of the biggest challenges in neuropsychology today, and how do you actually aim to address it?
The problem has always been in neuropsychology is how to deliver enough services. Most neuropsychologists takes you 6 months to get in to see them. That's way too long. We see people within 2 to 3 weeks because of efficiencies that we have built into our structure of performing services. But in most places, if you want to call up and get a neuropsychological evaluation, you may be waiting 3 to 6 months. Well, the problem that you're trying to address maybe has changed by then. If nothing else, you've lost valuable intervention time. I think that what's going to really happen is some of the automation, and particularly some of the artificial intelligence, is going to provide a structure or methodology that's going to be able to deliver some of these services earlier and to many more people. And I think that's the exciting thing, that if we manage this correctly, will be on the horizon. So that's very exciting. I think that it's like most things. Everyone talks about AI as being great, but also having some real pitfalls, some dangers associated with it. So setting up the boundaries to make it safe and effective is going to be the real issue going forward. But I think the tools are there, just a question of applying them.
Definitely. And definitely going to use the right tools in order to best optimize your sleep as well as and preventing the sleep apnea. And so sleep apnea does play a critical role in the cognitive decline. So how can people actually identify and address this condition to improve overall brain health?
Well, sleep apnea, as you know, is a condition that's caused by failure to breathe effectively while we're sleeping. So it's the number of times per hour that you stop breathing while you're sleeping, and the number of times your oxygen level declines by 4%. Those two factors together, if they occur more than 5 times per hour, are diagnosed as someone having sleep apnea. Now, this is much more common than we ever considered. There was always wide disparities in terms of what percentage of the population did this affect. The most recent research out about a year ago, which looked at a very large number of people in one study, it was actually 7 different locations banded together, and they put all of their new incoming participants in this study. So there were 6,000 Americans ages 58 and older who were studied. And they gave them, every one of them, a one night home sleep test. That's been one of the real breakthroughs, is you don't have to go into a laboratory or a hospital to get tested. You can now do it in your own bed, wearing a little gizmo on your finger that wraps around your wrist that is able to translate the information or to actually to transform and send it up to a specialist who's able to interpret the data. What they found was 50%, that's 1 out of 2 people age 58 and older, have this important condition. Now, if you have this condition, it's not just that you're not breathing, it means that oxygen is not getting to your brain. That causes changes in how your brain cells work. It interferes with attention, interferes with energy, interferes with your mood. The other thing that happens is if you have sleep apnea, you're probably not spending enough time in deep sleep. People think, oh, fell asleep, nothing happened. Well, actually, while you're sleeping, a lot happens. During the deepest stages, which is not the time when you're dreaming, that's actually the highest, the mildest stage, the lightest stage of sleep. In the deepest sleep, 2 things go on. Number one, memories get consolidated. And number two, the brain has a system called the glymphatic system that flushes out the waste products of thinking during the day while we're awake. So all day long, just like we're doing right now, we're talking, we're thinking, our brains are operating, our cells are operating, they're also creating trash. At night, there's a system that flushes that out. Well, it only works in deep sleep. And if you're not getting enough air, therefore not enough oxygen, you're oftentimes having interrupted sleep. You're gasping for air, you're moving around, you're waking up even though you don't know you're awake, and it keeps you out of deep sleep. So your brain doesn't have a chance to empty the trash cans essentially while you're sleeping.
Yes, that makes sense. And you said that you mentioned earlier that nearly half of dementia cases are actually preventable. So, what are some actionable steps people can take to reduce the risk?
There's 3 things I do every day. I'll share those with you. There's actually a lot of there's about 20 different factors in the model for dementia prevention that we present in our book, as well as a questionnaire, a checklist that people can take on our website, braindoc.com. And this checklist you fill out online and it'll actually generate an individual profile for you. So you can see where your health is on target, where it's near target, or whether it's off target. So that gives you the points that need to be improved. What I do, there are 3 steps. They're just things I do. Number one, I exercise every day. I walk about 10,000 steps a day, broken into different, half-hour periods. So it's basically about 45 minutes of walking. I do some resistance training on a 3 or 4 day a week kind of basis. Exercise turns out to be crucially important for how our brains work because it has to do with how our heart works. And if our heart works well, it means there's a very good likelihood our brains are going to work better. So that's number one. Number two, I've got sleep apnea. So every night I get into bed, I put a mask over my face that's hooked up to a machine called a CPAP machine, continuous positive airway pressure. And the CPAP machine puts air under pressure, pushes it through this hose that goes to the mask that makes it much easier for me to breathe, keeps my airway open so I spend time in stage 3 sleep, in deep sleep, and so I get oxygen throughout the night, and consequently, I think better during the day than I did 20 years ago before I started using CPAP. The third thing, this is going to seem a little silly, but it's actually important. I floss. I get regular dental checkups. I brush my teeth several times a day, and I floss several times a day. Most people don't know this, but as we get older and our gums begin to recede away from our teeth, we build pockets where things gather, bacteria accumulate, and we can get infections that will actually change our brain for the worse. So taking care of your teeth. I tell people dental floss is also mental floss. And people don't even think about it because, yeah, it's just my teeth. Well, it turns out tooth decay, gum disease are important, and we need to take care of how we brush and whether we floss in order to have our best brains available.
I honestly did not know that, and that's very important for everyone to know because honestly, flossing, I didn't even expect that to be effect on the brain for sure.
One of the interesting things is that I never used to floss because I was using the string and trying to get it in behind my teeth and everything was like, oh my, this is terrible. And got spit all over the mirror. Why do I want to do this? And I discovered these things that are curved dental picks and you push them in between the teeth. Actually, my dental hygienist said, here, take this sample, try this. It was like a revelation. Now I can floss. I don't have to get behind. It stays in my mouth. I'm able to get all those different particles of food out between my teeth. And suddenly my gums now look better than they did 5 years ago.
Wow, that's awesome that she was able to do that for you because, yeah, flossing with the string is definitely not ideal, and a lot of people do hate that. But I'm glad there is new things like the floss pick and all that to help that. And so, what's a surprising fact that about sleep apnea that most people want to know outside of the example that you have with the floss?
That women are just as prone to sleep apnea as are men once you get into your 50s. Turns out that for years we've always looked at this as being a fat man condition because we were conditioned to viewing this primarily if you're an overweight man who snores, that would raise our suspicion and prompt us to get a test for sleep apnea. We ignored the women. And we didn't appreciate the fact that when women get older, go through menopause and lose their estrogen, that the muscles and the flexibility in their airway now becomes the same as men's have always been because we men have not had estrogen at that level to help with our airway. So now women and thin women have significant levels of sleep apnea and should be tested for this. In fact, the worst case I've ever seen was a woman who was thin like a model. She was in her 70s. She stopped breathing 120 times an hour. She had severe, severe sleep apnea. Treating her sleep apnea woke up her brain, basically reversed much of the cognitive weaknesses that she was experiencing. Who would have thunk it? Air, oxygen, really important stuff.
Yeah, I would not expect that at all. And that is very important to tell everyone that yes, women are also a key. They're able to do this or get this as well. And that's awesome. And when it comes to like you built a lot in your career and achieved a lot, the books, the two companies, and more. And so, what are some mistakes that you actually made while building it all out, and what lessons did they actually teach you?
We don't learn a lot about business in graduate school. In fact, you don't learn anything about business. So, trying to develop a model that is effective is really important. Retaining people who buy into the mission is really important. And I've made my share of hiring mistakes over time. I am not the attaboy, pat the back kind of supervisor. Every year I sort of promise myself I'm going to do a better job of this. I don't do a great job of it. I do, recognize people when they're doing a good job, but I'm more often perfectionistic than I'd like to be. So I've made those mistakes and just sort of figuring out how to motivate people, how to get them to buy into the mission so that they see this as something they're contributing to. And I've learned this more as I've gotten older, but that's pretty much what I think is important in terms of growing a practice.
Totally makes sense. And I appreciate all your insight on this podcast. I appreciate you being a guest on it. And yeah, for everyone that wants to check it out or get more information about all of this, go to braindoc.com. And is there anything else you would like to say?
I tell people there's a lot of worry about dementia, and my response is stop being a dementia worrier. start being a prevention warrior. This takes action. Find out where you stand, where their strengths and weaknesses are. Understand the science behind this. Don't give in to, clickbait. Eat these berries, take this supplement. They really don't work. Focus on the science, what really makes a difference, and then put your energies into it.
Yeah, it's definitely got to take the right actions and earlier than later, obviously, to make sure that this all is taken care of. But yes, thank you for being a part of the podcast. And for everyone watching, I'll see everyone in the next episode of Zero to Empire.